The air was thick with tension. The day Seraph had been waiting for had arrived, but beneath her excitement was a deep-rooted sense of doubt that had haunted her for weeks. As she stood before the mirror, adjusting the veil that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In her heart, she knew that today wasn't just about a wedding. It was about a decision that would change everything. But what if it was the wrong one? Seraph wasn't alone in her doubts. Across the room, her daughter Lena sat quietly, her small fingers gripping a photograph of a man long gone. Caleb, her late father, the love of Seraph's life who had been taken too soon. And now, as Seraph prepared to marry Kester, she couldn't help but wonder, could anyone ever replace Caleb? Lena stared at the photo, speaking softly to the image of the man she barely remembered. Daddy, do you think Mom will be happy? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Do you think Kester's the right one for her? Seraph's heart ached as she heard Lena's question. She had tried so hard to move on, to make a future with Kester, but was it really what she wanted? The warm memories of Caleb flooded her mind. The gentle way he held her, the laughter they shared, the love that felt so real, so pure. It was a life she had once taken for granted, but now, standing on the precipice of a new beginning, she couldn't ignore the shadows of that lost love. The love that had been ripped away from her too soon, the love she feared might never be replicated. As Seraph walked through the house, her mind drifted to the quiet moments she had shared with Caleb. He was more than a husband. He was her best friend, her anchor. He had been her everything, and Lena's everything too. But now here she was, standing before a man who promised security, who promised stability, something Seraph had desperately needed in the aftermath of Caleb's death. But in the deep recesses of her heart, she wondered if she had settled. Was Kester truly the man she loved, or had she simply convinced herself that love was enough, that stability and security would be enough? But Lena was different. To Lena, Caleb wasn't just a memory. He was a constant presence, someone who had shaped her world even in his absence. At night, Lena would speak to Caleb's photograph, convinced that somehow he was watching over them. She would talk to him as though he were still here, asking for guidance, asking for reassurance. And in her dreams, she saw him, clear as day, his voice soft and loving, warning her of something. Something was coming, something terrible. And though she couldn't put the pieces together, Lena felt it in the pit of her stomach. The wedding. It was all wrong. She had tried to ignore it, tried to go along with it for her mother's sake, for the sake of keeping everything together. But something in her gut told her she had to speak up. She had to stop it. But how could a child stop a wedding? A wedding everyone, including her mother, had already decided was inevitable. As Seraph prepared for the wedding, she could feel the weight of the choices she had made pressing on her. She had confided in her best friend, Juanita, who urged her to move forward. You've waited long enough, Juanita had said, trying to comfort Seraph. It's time to let go and embrace the future. You deserve to be happy. Juanita's words made sense. Stability. Security. It was exactly what Seraph needed for herself and for Lena. But there was another voice in her head. A quieter voice. The voice of Cyril, a family friend who had always been there when she needed someone to talk to. Cyril had been the one to suggest that Seraph take a step back, that she needed to ask herself if this was what she truly wanted. Cyril had always been understanding, patient, and kind, but his gentle encouragement to question her feelings made Seraph uneasy. Did she truly love Kester? Or was she just holding on to the idea of love, clinging to the illusion of what life should be like, what it could be like if only she could let go of Caleb? Lena noticed the tension too. She saw her mother's pained expressions when she thought no one was watching. She heard the soft sighs, the hesitation in Seraph's voice when she spoke of the future. Lena wasn't sure what was wrong, but she knew something was. And the more she tried to ignore it, the louder the voice inside her head became. The voice that said, "Something is not right. You need to stop it." So, as the day of the wedding drew near, Lena's thoughts grew darker. Every time she looked at Kester, she felt that same discomfort. He didn't treat her like Caleb did. He wasn't kind in the same way. He wasn't warm or loving, and he certainly didn't make her feel like she was enough. He didn't make her feel like her father had made her feel. And no matter how much her mother tried to convince herself that Kester was the right choice, Lena couldn't ignore the unease in her heart. The night before the wedding, Lena had a vivid dream where she was standing at the altar, watching her mother and Kester exchange vows. But as the vows were spoken, the world around her began to twist and crumble. The people in the audience blurred, their faces turning to shadows, and as her mother turned to smile at Kester, Lena saw something terrifying in her mother's eyes. It wasn't love, it was fear. When Lena woke up in a cold sweat, she knew what she had to do. She couldn't let this happen. She had to stop it. Seraph, meanwhile, was caught in the struggle of her life. The wedding had already been planned, the guests had been invited, the dress had been fitted, and Kester had already begun to feel like part of their lives. But with every step closer to the altar, Seraph could feel herself drifting further from the woman she used to be. She tried to convince herself that Kester was the right choice, that this was the path she had to take. But in her heart, she knew it wasn't true, and that gnawing sense of doubt only grew stronger as the wedding day approached. In the end, Seraph's struggle wasn't just about the man she was marrying, it was about her own heart. Could she let go of the love she had shared with Caleb and allow herself to love again? Could she allow herself to believe that love could be something different, something real with Kester? Or would she choose the path of security, the path that promised nothing but comfort and stability? And then there was Lena, her daughter, who seemed to see through it all. Lena, whose bond with Caleb could never be replaced. Lena, whose dreams warned her of something dangerous looming on the horizon. The stage was set, the stakes were higher than ever. Seraph had to make a choice, but would she be strong enough to follow her heart, or would Lena have to take matters into her own hands? Before we dive deeper into this whirlwind of emotions, love, and decisions, do us a favor, like, subscribe, and settle in, because what you're about to witness is not just a wedding story. It's a story of love, loss, and the powerful lessons that come from listening to your heart. Stay tuned for what's coming next, because this one's going to blow your mind. Now, let's dive in. The day before the wedding, a heavy silence settled over the house. It was a tension so thick it was almost palpable. Seraph, caught in the flurry of final wedding preparations, tried to keep her mind occupied. But the more she focused on the details, the cake, the flowers, the seating arrangements, the more she felt a strange hollowness creeping in. It was as if her life, which had once felt so full of love and meaning, was now filled with empty rituals, things she had to do to keep up appearances. The wedding wasn't about the celebration of love anymore. It felt like an obligation. Lena, meanwhile, felt an unease she couldn't shake. Her mother's excitement only heightened the tension in the air. She watched Seraph rushing around, barely noticing the signs of worry in her daughter's eyes. Lena, however, couldn't ignore the constant feeling that something was terribly wrong. Kester had been polite, yes, but distant. She didn't feel the warmth that her father had always shown her. When Kester smiled at her, it didn't reach his eyes. When they had shared quiet moments, his gaze was elsewhere, his mind preoccupied. It was the same every time they were together, distant, cold, and detached. Kester was kind enough, but there was something about him that felt calculated, as if he was only playing a role to get what he wanted. The more Lena observed, the more she found herself withdrawing from him. She had seen the way he interacted with her mother, charming, affectionate, the perfect fiancé. But when he turned to Lena, it was different. There was no real connection. It was as if she was a mere afterthought, a small inconvenience in his plan to marry Seraph. Kester had no patience for her, no desire to make her feel like she was part of the family. It hurt Lena. It hurt to know that he didn't see her the way her father had, like she mattered. It was more than just the absence of warmth. It was a presence of something colder, something calculating. In an attempt to make sense of her feelings, Lena found comfort in spending time with Cyril. He was always patient, always willing to listen. Cyril had been a part of their lives for years. He was a family friend who had seen Seraph through the hardest times, and he had always been a calming influence on Lena, offering wise words when she needed them most. Lena, her brow furrowed with confusion and concern, opened up to Cyril one evening as they sat in the quiet corner of the garden. "I don't know, Cyril. I just don't feel right about this wedding. Mom says everything's fine, but something feels wrong. I don't think Kester's the one for her. Cyril looked at her thoughtfully, his expression full of understanding. Lena, your feelings are valid, he said gently, his voice warm and reassuring. Sometimes, when we don't understand something, it's our hearts trying to tell us something important. Trust yourself. But what if I'm wrong? Lena whispered, her hands trembling as she fiddled with a small stone she had found in the garden. What if I'm just scared because it's not like it was before? With Dad? I want Mom to be happy, but I'm not sure Kester is the one who will make her happy. I don't want her to make a mistake. Cyril's voice softened. It's never easy, Lena, and it's okay to be scared. But you need to remember that love, real love, isn't about stability alone. It's about trust, about connection. If you're feeling this way, it's important to pay attention. Lena nodded slowly, but the weight in her chest only grew heavier. She wanted to believe that Cyril was right. She wanted to trust her mother's judgment. But deep down, she could feel it. Something was terribly wrong. Something was being hidden, something that went far beyond the ceremony or the wedding vows. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she felt she had to find out before it was too late. The night before the wedding, Lena tossed and turned in her bed. The dream came again, just as vivid and terrifying as the first time. She was standing at the altar with her mother, who looked beautiful in her wedding gown, but there was a shadow behind Seraph's smile. Caleb's face appeared in the crowd, standing alone, and in the dream, he reached out to her, whispering in a voice that seemed to echo through time. Stop the wedding, Lena. This isn't love. This is a lie. Lena woke with a start, her heart pounding. She could still feel the warmth of her father's presence, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. It was the fear of someone who knew something terrible was about to happen. She couldn't let it go on. She had to stop it. The wedding day arrived, bright and sunny, but Lena's heart felt like it had been plunged into cold, dark water. The house was alive with activity, but Lena was distant, withdrawn. Seraph, too caught up in her preparations, barely noticed her daughter's quiet mood. Lena overheard snippets of conversation between Kester and his brother James as they discussed the logistics of the wedding. The words that Kester spoke cut through her like ice. Once we're married, everything will be set, Kester said. It'll secure my position. It's a good deal for both of us. The money, the connections, it's exactly what I need. James was silent for a moment before replying, but don't you think there's more to it than that? Shouldn't love come first? Kester chuckled, his voice dripping with a sort of condescension that made Lena's stomach turn. Love is overrated, James. We're talking about a future here. Stability, power, that's what matters. You should know that by now. Lena's mind raced as she overheard the conversation. The words stung, not just because they revealed Kester's true motives, but because they confirmed her worst fear. This wedding wasn't about love. It was about Kester securing his place in the world, about using Seraph to climb the social ladder. There was no real emotion, no real connection. It was all a facade, a transaction. Her heart sank as she realized that her mother was about to make a huge mistake, one that would affect them both for the rest of their lives. How could she let this happen? How could she stand by and watch her mother marry a man who didn't care about her, who didn't care about Lena, who only cared about what he could gain? Lena felt the weight of her decision. She couldn't stay silent. She had to speak up. But how? How could she stop this wedding? It was too late for anyone to back out. Everyone was already in motion. The dress was on, the guests were arriving, and the ceremony was set to begin. But in the quiet of her heart, Lena knew what she had to do. She had to stop it. She had to stop her mother from making the biggest mistake of her life, even if it meant facing the consequences. As Lena prepared herself for the storm that was about to unfold, she caught a glimpse of her mother, busy with final touches, her face glowing with a smile that seemed forced. It was clear to Lena now. Seraph didn't want this wedding either. She wanted the stability, the comfort, but she didn't have the strength to admit that it wasn't real. Lena's resolve hardened. She couldn't let it happen. Lena's anxiety reached a fever pitch as the time for the ceremony grew closer. The house had taken on an almost surreal air, like everything was moving in slow motion while she stood still, trapped in her own thoughts. The noise of wedding preparations, the final touches, the bustle of the guests arriving, the chatter of well-wishers, felt distant as though it were happening in another world. The weight of what was to come pressed heavily on Lena's chest, making each breath feel more labored than the last. She found herself retreating into quiet spaces, away from the chaos. The garden, where she had spent so many hours with her father, felt like a sanctuary now. It was here, amidst the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of conversation, that she found Cyril. He was sitting on a bench under the oak tree, looking pensive but gentle, as always. He had a way of making everything seem more manageable, even in the most difficult of times. Lena sat beside him, her eyes filled with turmoil. "I don't know if I can do this, Cyril," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like if I don't stop this wedding, something terrible is going to happen. But I don't know what to do. I'm just a kid. Who will listen to me?" Cyril turned toward her, his face soft with understanding. "Lena, your feelings are valid," he said gently. "I know you're scared. You want your mom to be happy, and you want her to make the right choice. But you have to remember that Seraph is an adult. She needs to make her own decisions. It's not easy, but she has to find her own way, even if it means making mistakes. We can't control everything." "But Cyril, you don't understand." Lena's voice cracked, the weight of her frustration and fear spilling out. "I'm not just worried about her. I'm worried about us. If she marries Kester, everything will change. I know he doesn't love her the way Dad did. I know he doesn't love me the way Dad did. It's not right, Cyril. It's not right for us." Cyril's expression softened further, his eyes full of sympathy. "I understand more than you think, Lena. Sometimes the people we love make choices that hurt us, even when they don't mean to. You're just trying to protect your mom, but you have to let her walk her own path, even if you don't agree with it. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to be there for them, no matter what." Lena sat in silence for a moment, taking in his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that everything would be okay, that her mom knew what she was doing. But the gnawing feeling in her chest refused to subside. She couldn't shake the vivid dreams of Caleb warning her, the constant unease that seemed to follow her every step. Was she really just being a child, overreacting? Or was her instinct right all along? Just as Lena began to wrestle with her thoughts, she heard the distant chime of the church bells. The time had come. The ceremony was about to begin. Back in the house, Seraph stood before the mirror in her wedding dress. She was beautiful, radiant even, but her eyes were clouded with doubt. She held a photo of Caleb in her hands, tracing his face with her finger as memories flooded back. She remembered the way he had always been there for her, his love, his laughter, the way he made her feel safe in a world that often seemed too harsh. But that was a lifetime ago, a lifetime she couldn't get back. She wondered, just for a moment, if she was making a mistake. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone knocking on the door. It was Kester, looking as polished and composed as ever. His eyes gleamed with excitement, his expression one of perfect calm. "It's time," he said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Are you ready?" Seraph nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but this was the life she had chosen. She had to move on, for Lena's sake, for stability, for the future. The wedding ceremony began, and everything unfolded just as Seraph had imagined. The guests took their seats in the church, the soft murmur of conversation fading into the background as the music started to play. Lena stood near the back, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. She couldn't breathe. She could feel the weight of her father's absence pressing down on her chest, could almost hear his voice urging her to stop this madness before it was too late. As Seraph walked down the aisle, her face a picture of grace and composure, Lena felt the world around her grow quieter, more distant. The moment felt surreal, as if she were watching it all unfold from outside her own body. She caught glimpses of her mother's face, so hopeful, so unaware of the impending storm, and her stomach twisted. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Lena's thoughts spiraled out of control. Kester's coldness, his indifference, the conversation with James. Everything in her told her she had to stop this, even if it meant facing the consequences. She couldn't stand by and let her mother make this mistake. Suddenly, without thinking, Lena rushed forward. She pushed past guests who stared at her in confusion, her heart racing, her mind consumed by the need to stop the wedding. She reached the altar just as Seraph and Kester were about to exchange vows. "Stop, Mom!" Stop! Lena's voice rang out loud and clear. The entire church fell silent, every eye turned toward her, shock and confusion spreading through the room. Seraph's face went pale, her eyes widening in disbelief. Kester stood frozen, his expression one of disbelief and anger. Lena could hardly breathe as she stood there, facing her mother, the weight of her words almost too much to bear. Mom, you don't have to do this, she cried. You don't have to marry him. He doesn't love you the way Dad did. He's only doing this for himself. I overheard him talking to James about it. This wedding isn't about us. It's about him getting what he wants. You deserve more than this, Mom. You deserve love. Not this deal. Gasps filled the room and the tension grew thick. Seraph's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she looked at her daughter. She wanted to believe Lena, but the shock of her outburst left her speechless. Kester, his face contorted with rage, stepped forward. This is ridiculous, he spat. You don't understand anything, Lena. You're just a child. You think this is about love? Love doesn't matter in the real world. We need stability, security. Lena shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, Kester, love matters. It always matters. The tension in the room was palpable as Seraph stood frozen, torn between the daughter she loved and the man she thought she needed to move on with. The guests watched in stunned silence, unsure of what would happen next. Kester, trying to salvage the situation, took a step forward, his voice icy. Lena, you're just making a scene. You don't know what you're talking about. This is what's best for everyone. Seraph, her face pale and her mind racing, looked at Lena. The damage had already been done. She could no longer ignore the truth. Her daughter was right. This wasn't about love. It never had been. She had been too blinded by the idea of stability, of moving on from Caleb, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. In the silence that followed, Cyril stepped forward, his presence grounding. He placed a comforting hand on Seraph's shoulder, offering her a gentle look of understanding. Seraph, he said softly, you have to listen to your heart. What Lena said, it's the truth. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for what you can provide. The room was still, but in that silence, everything shifted. After the dramatic confrontation at the altar, the church remained in stunned silence, a heavy tension filling the air. Guests whispered among themselves, exchanging confused and uneasy glances. Seraph stood frozen in front of her daughter, the weight of the truth slowly sinking in. Kester, furious and humiliated, stormed out of the church without a word to anyone, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls. Seraph, her mind racing, excused herself from the chaos, retreating to a small room at the back of the church. She closed the door quietly behind her back resting against it as she sank to the floor. The sharpness of the moment left her breathless. In the silence of the room, Seraph was left alone with her thoughts, replaying everything that had just transpired. The look on Lena's face, the harsh words from Kester, and the painful realization that had been building up for months. She thought of Caleb, the love they had shared, and the life they had built together. Those were memories filled with warmth, laughter, and deep emotional connection. Caleb had been her rock, her partner, and Lena's father. She had never questioned her love for him, nor had she ever doubted that they were meant to be together. But Caleb was gone, and in the years that followed, Seraph had become consumed with the need for security. Kester had seemed like the answer, someone who could fill the space Caleb had left behind, someone who could give her and Lena the stability they needed. But stability, as she now realized, was not the same as love. She had confused comfort with connection, and now it was painfully clear. Lena's outburst at the wedding had shattered her illusions, forcing Seraph to confront the truth she had been avoiding. Her relationship with Kester was built on the wrong foundations. It was a relationship based on convenience and the need to feel safe, not on the deep emotional bond that she and Caleb had shared. As the weight of this realization settled over her, Seraph closed her eyes and let the tears fall. She hadn't allowed herself to cry in so long, not since Caleb's death. She had been too busy trying to keep everything together, trying to be strong for Lena. But now, in this quiet room, there was nothing left to hold back. She wept for Caleb, for the lost years, for the mistakes she had made, and for the realization that she had almost let her fears dictate her choices. Meanwhile, Lena stood outside the church, her face pale, her heart heavy. She had done what she believed was right, but now that the dust had settled, she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. She had stopped her mother from marrying Kester, but at what cost? Was she really the one who had ruined everything? Her thoughts were a whirlwind, and she didn't know where to turn. She found Cyril sitting on a bench outside, waiting quietly as if he had been expecting her. He had a calm, reassuring presence that always seemed to make things feel a little more manageable. Lena sat beside him, her eyes downcast. I didn't mean to do this, Cyril, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted Mom to be happy. I didn't know. I didn't know it would end like this. Cyril placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. Lena, you did the right thing, he said. You spoke up because you cared. You saw something that didn't feel right, and you followed your heart. That's not something to feel guilty about. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing to do. Lena looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But now everything is falling apart. What if I was wrong? What if I ruined everything for Mom? Cyril shook his head slowly, offering her a comforting smile. You didn't ruin anything, Lena. You helped your mom avoid a mistake that would have hurt her. She'll see that eventually. Sometimes the people we love need us to show them the truth, even when it's hard to hear. You did that. Lena let out a shaky breath, trying to take in Cyril's words. Slowly, a sense of relief began to wash over her. She had done the right thing, even if it didn't feel like it in the moment. She had to trust that her mother would understand. Eventually. Later that evening, after the church had emptied out, Sarah found herself sitting at the kitchen table in her house, staring into space. The house felt too quiet, too empty without the hum of wedding preparations, the sound of guests laughing, the music filling the air. Everything had come to a screeching halt, and Seraph was left alone with her thoughts. Lena eventually entered, her eyes red from crying. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward her mother, who was still lost in her own mind. When Lena spoke, her voice was small but determined. I'm sorry, Mom, she said softly. I didn't want to ruin your wedding. I just I didn't want you to make a mistake. I didn't want you to marry someone who didn't love you like Dad did. Seraph looked at her daughter, her heart breaking at the raw honesty in Lena's voice. She stood up slowly, pulling Lena into an embrace. Oh, Lena, you didn't ruin anything. I'm the one who made the mistake. I let fear cloud my judgment. I thought I needed someone to fill the hole Caleb left, but I was wrong. I was so afraid of being alone that I didn't realize what really mattered. Lena pulled away slightly, looking up at her mother with a mixture of sadness and hope. Do you still miss Dad, Mom? Seraph nodded, her voice thick with emotion. Every day, but I think I've been holding on to the past in a way that kept me from moving forward. I was trying to recreate something that was gone. I didn't realize that I could still love him and honor what we had without holding on to a life that wasn't meant to be. Lena nodded slowly, understanding. So, what happens now? Seraph smiled softly, wiping away a tear. Now we heal. We take things one step at a time, and we focus on what's important. Love, trust, respect. Those are the things that really matter. And I promise you, Lena, I will never make the mistake of choosing security over love again. The two of them sat there side by side in the quiet warmth of their home. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. It was a moment of healing, of understanding, and of looking toward the future with hope. Over the following weeks, Seraph and Lena spent more time together, rebuilding their bond and focusing on their emotional well-being. They talked openly about their fears, their memories of Caleb, and their hopes for the future. Seraph worked through her feelings of guilt and regret, gradually coming to terms with the fact that she had tried to force herself into a mold that wasn't hers to fill. Lena, in turn, began to heal emotionally. She had done what she felt was necessary to protect her family, and now she was learning to trust that love, in its purest form, would always find a way. She no longer needed to carry the weight of responsibility for her mother's happiness. As time passed, Sarah found herself more at peace with the idea of moving forward. She would never forget Caleb, but she knew that she didn't need to hold on to the past to honor him. And Lena, her bright, wise daughter, would always be the greatest gift Caleb had ever given her. Together, They embraced the future, knowing that love and connection were the true foundations for any life they built. In the weeks that followed, Seraph immersed herself in the quiet rhythm of daily life. She made the decision to step away from dating for a while, a conscious effort to reconnect with herself. For too long, she had lived in the shadow of loss and the need for external validation. Now she realized that true happiness had to come from within, not from seeking another relationship or approval from others. She started dedicating her time to exploring her own passions, something she had neglected during the years of grieving Caleb and trying to hold on to the past. Lena, too, flourished during this period. With the weight of the wedding drama lifted, she felt a sense of relief. She had always been a sensitive child, but now her resilience shone through as she and F worked through their emotions together. Their bond deepened as they shared stories, memories of Caleb, and their own reflections on the future. Seraph made it clear to Lena that she wasn't alone in her healing journey. Together, they embraced the notion that life was moving forward, and with it, the possibility of new beginnings. Cyril remained a steady presence in their lives, offering wisdom and comfort without overstepping. He respected Seraph's space and gave her the time she needed to rediscover herself. He often stopped by for coffee or a casual chat, that offering words of encouragement, but never pushing her into anything she wasn't ready for. As the months passed, Seraph began to find peace with the decision to end things with Kester. While she had once thought that security and stability were enough to fill the void left by Caleb, she now understood that true fulfillment came from within. She no longer feared being alone, and with that newfound confidence, Seraph was able to focus fully on her relationship with Lena and her own personal growth. One crisp afternoon, Seraph and Lena found themselves at their favorite cafe in the heart of the city. The cafe had always been their quiet escape, a place where they could relax and unwind, away from the pressures of the world. The sound of clinking cups and quiet conversations around them created a soothing ambiance, perfect for the conversation they were about to have. Seraph looked at her daughter, who was sitting across from her with a soft smile. Lena's eyes were bright, her posture relaxed, and Seraph could see the transformation in her. No longer the anxious child who had been afraid for her mother's happiness, but a young girl who had come to understand that love, in its truest form, was not about control or fear. Lena took a sip of her hot chocolate and placed the cup down carefully before meeting her mother's gaze. "You know, Mom," she began, her voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately." Seraph nodded, her heart swelling with love and bittersweet memories. "I know, sweetie. I think about him all the time." Lena smiled softly. "But I think it's time I finally let go of that sadness. I don't want to hold on to it anymore. I want to remember the good things about him, the love he gave us, the way he made us feel safe. But I also want to look forward. I want to embrace the future. I want to make room for new memories, new joys." Seraph's heart felt light at her daughter's words. She had known that Lena was strong, but hearing her articulate such wisdom filled her with a deep sense of pride. "You're right, Lena. Your father will always be a part of us and will always carry his love with us. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward and create new stories, new moments." Lena's eyes brightened. "Yeah, and I think that's what you need to do too, Mom." Seraph's gaze softened, a gentle smile forming on her lips. "I think you're right. I'm learning that it's okay to let go of the past and focus on what's in front of us, and what's in front of me is you. You're my future, Lena. You're the greatest gift your father and I ever gave each other." Lena's cheeks flushed with warmth, and she reached across the table, taking Seraph's hand in hers. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just soaking in the peace of the moment. The world around them seemed to pause, as if it too recognized the significance of what had just been said. Seraph squeezed her daughter's hand gently, her heart full of gratitude. "We're going to be okay, Lena. You've helped me see that. You've taught me that love isn't about holding on to what was, it's about embracing what is and being open to what could be." Lena nodded, her eyes sparkling with hope. "Yeah, we'll be okay." The two of them shared a quiet laugh, the bond between them stronger than ever. The future no longer seemed like an intimidating unknown. It was a promise that together they would face whatever came their way with love, trust and respect as their guide. As they finished their drinks and stood to leave, Sarah felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. She didn't need to rush into another relationship. She didn't need to seek approval from anyone else. She had everything she needed right here, within herself and in the daughter who had taught her so much about strength, resilience, and the importance of emotional connection. The walk home felt lighter, and though the city was bustling with life around them, it was as if the world was in sync with their hearts. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt hopeful, not just for the future, but for the love she already had and the love that was yet to come. As they reached their doorstep, Lena turned to her mother with a smile. "We're ready for whatever comes next, right, Mom?" Sarah smiled back, her heart full. "Absolutely, sweetie. We're ready for everything." And as they stepped inside their home, they knew that the journey ahead, whatever it held, would be one they would face together, with open hearts and a deep understanding of the true meaning of love. As Seraph and Lena stepped into their home, the weight of the past lifted, and the promise of a brighter future filled the space between them. It wasn't about perfection or immediate answers. It was about learning, growing, and having the courage to face the unknown with hope. Their story was far from over. It was only just beginning. And as you watched their journey unfold, we all realized something important. Sometimes it's the hard decisions, the difficult moments, and the unexpected choices that shape us into who we are meant to become. Seraph learned that love isn't about convenience, and Lena showed us the power of trust and courage in moments of uncertainty. If you felt inspired by Seraph and Lena's journey, if you believe in the power of love, family, and finding peace within, then this story is for you. Share this message with someone you think might need to hear it today. Before you go, remember to hit that like button if you enjoyed the story. Subscribe to An Incredible and Teachable Story for more meaningful, heartfelt stories like this one. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family so they too can take something beautiful away from this journey. And of course, hit that notification bell so you'll never miss another amazing story. Thank you for being a part of our community. We'll see you next time for another incredible teachable moment. Until then, take care, and remember, the best is yet to come.